Okay, thank you. Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. This is Ibrahim Bagheri. I'm a professor of electrical, computer, and biomedical engineering at Toronto Metropolitan University. And I'm the director for the NSEC Create program on responsible development of artificial intelligence. I'm very pleased to welcome our invited speaker today, Professor Andrea Zeffiro, who's an associate professor in the Department of Communication Studies and Media Arts, academic director for the Lewis and Ruth Sherman Center for Digital Scholarship, and an affiliate faculty member in the Master of Public Policy in Digital Society program and the Cultural Studies and Critical Theory MA program at McMaster University. Her area of research and teaching include critical data studies, critical cybersecurity studies, data justice, and qualitative digital research methods. Her previous work on immersive mobile experiences, responsive installations, and virtual and augmented reality has appeared in academic journals, edited collections, and exhibited at the Banff New Media Institute and the California Nanosystems Institute, and in public spaces in Montreal, Toronto, and New York. Andrea's collaborative digital storytelling project, Techno Trash, is listed in Digital Humanities Library reference guides at Loyola University, Virginia Tech, and Northwestern University. I'm very pleased, Andrea, to have you here with us, and the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, let me just get myself set up. Okay. Okay, how does that look?
Looks good to me.
Terrific. Okay, I'm just gonna, just so I can see my notes here. Okay, so I'm joining today within Treaty 3 territory, where I live and work here on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. And this land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, the Between the Lakes Treaty of 1792, and is very close to the 1784 Haldimand Treaty, which holds the land 6 miles to each side of the Grand River as a tract for 6 nations, which is currently not being honored. And as I was reflecting on the land acknowledgement and my talk today, a connection I made is with the colonial construct of security. Who has access to security and safety, who or what is left out and rendered insecure or a threat, and more importantly, how is security, be it about Indigenous land, data sovereignty, constricted to a coloniality of power framework. So I don't necessarily get into this today, but I center it as a consideration for the topic we'll be delving into. And thank you again. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you all today. I've been observing the NSERC Responsible AI program at a distance, and presenting my research in this context is a real honor. So thank you. And as folks were coming into the Zoom space or the Zoom room, I also recognize so many names on the call. So thank you for making the time to be here today. Okay. My overall aim today is for us to consider cybersecurity and the integration of artificial intelligence into the cybersecurity domain, not simply as a natural progression of technological advancement or an objective or neutral technical process to safeguard computer systems, networks, data, and digital infrastructures. I mean, I recognize all of that as well, but I'm interested in thinking about how cybersecurity is simultaneously a technical and sociocultural formation with significant consequences for the political responses that can arise from it. The questions I intend to in my talk today are, where do collectively held beliefs and aspirations about the application of generative AI in cybersecurity originate from? How are the possibilities of generative AI institutionally stabilized and publicly performed? How are visions about the future embedded in the support for and advances of generative AI in cybersecurity? Who and what lures us with visions of generative AI's proximate possibilities? Which expert discourses hold relevance? So these questions are informed by a socio-technical Imaginaries framework, influenced by recent work on socio-technical Imaginaries by Jasanoff and Kim, along with research on specific socio-technical aspects such as algorithmic imaginaries, and that comes from Tana Bucher. platform Imaginaries, and that's the work of Corinne Van Essen and Thomas Powell, and AI Imaginaries from Vanessa Richter, Kristen Katzenbach, and Mike Schaefer. And for Richter, Katzenbach, and Schaefer, the concept of Imaginaries, this is a quote from them, can provide an analytic framework to examine, quote, technological perception, public acceptance or dissonance, and future technological visions within public, but also corporate, political, and other discourses. Discursive and public imagination play a pivotal role in envisioning and determining trajectories of AI and its integration into society. So while I touch on mainstream conceptions of cybersecurity in part 1 and move towards discussing differential vulnerabilities in part 3, I think I spend most of the time in part 2, and this is the space of imaginaries, those future visions, competing agendas, discourses, and rhetorics that shape a collective understanding or not about generative AI and cybersecurity. Deciphering how the possibilities of generative AI and cybersecurity are institutionally stabilized and publicly performed can enable us to parse the construct of cybersecurity itself. Underpinning my talk and the kind of wider research project is an argument for the coexistence of different models and approaches to cybersecurity, especially with the widespread move to automate it. I've organized the content today into 3 sections, and these more are like episodes or vignettes, each exploring an aspect of a concept I'm formulating called automating insecurities, and it's still quite formative. So I look forward to your comments and thoughts. So as an original concept, it builds and expands on Virginia Eubanks's work, Automating Inequality, which examines the impacts of automated decision-making on public services in the United States, including welfare provision, homelessness, and child protection services. Eubanks charts how shifting from human control to automated systems creates more hindrances for those needing support, with the most invasive and punitive systems aimed at the poor. And my work considers how the shift to automated cybersecurity systems has the potential to automate insecurities because these systems register very specific risks, threats, and harms, thereby omitting the disproportionate ways people experience digital and networked insecurities and vulnerabilities. Mar Hicks also informs my thinking. In Programmed Inequality, Hicks excavates the history of women technologists and the feminization of computer work in the post-World War II UK and US, along with the decline of women in computer science. Programmed Inequality examines computerization as, quote, an explicitly hegemonic project, unquote, that has assisted some groups of people in consolidating power at the expense of others, and gender, class, and race discrimination was central to this process. Similarly, I'm interested in how the take-up of generative AI in cybersecurity, both in practice and discourse, is a hegemonic project. So for example, situating key players as engaged within the AI arms race is as much about technological development and dominance as it is about setting standards and norms and influencing governance structures. And last, but certainly not least, Ruha Benjamin's notion of carceral imagination undergirds my contribution. Benjamin's concept builds on Carla Shedd's sociological analysis of a carceral continuum to interpret how discriminatory practices are instituted not only through the imprisonment of populations, but also through caring sites, policies, and practices. Benjamin proposes carceral imaginaries to promote what she says is an expansive understanding of the carceral that attends to the institutional and imaginative underpinnings of oppressive systems. As Benjamin writes, subjugation, after all, is hardly ever the explicit objective of science and technology. Instead, noble aims such as health and safety serve as a kind of moral prophylactic for newfangled forms of social control. Carceral imaginaries understands progress and innovation as disproportionately impacting people, and the same can be said about safety and security. So I want to problematize the assumed inherent neutrality of automating cybersecurity to understand how these practices and processes can also camouflage the violence of security and its attendant concepts and practices like surveillance. Okay, so we're going to move on to part 1, taking away the complexity. So implementing AI-powered automation to support cybersecurity practices and processes is absolutely necessary in certain contexts. Since the start of the COVID pandemic in 2020, there has been an increase in cloud services and users, remote workers, interconnected and interdependent devices sending IoT data to the cloud, and threat actors adopting AI to find weaknesses. Additional challenges facing the sector are said to be lessened with AI automation. So already limited security teams are burdened with too much data from disparate sources. And the average time to detect and respond to a security risk incident has increased in the last 2 years, and manual threat investigation only slows down response times. So without AI support, analysts must use complex query languages, operations, and reverse engineering to analyze vast amounts of data to understand threats. So there's widespread industry promotion of generative AI as a solution to workplace workload fatigue and the talent shortage. Sunil Pati, GM and VP of Cloud Security at Google Cloud, described the, quote, power of generative AI to be a force multiplier across all security, and that generative AI has the potential to reduce the toil of repetitive tasks that plague security teams. Similarly, Tomer Weingarten, the co-founder and CEO of cybersecurity company SentinelOne, touted how generative AI is completely transformative to how you do cybersecurity by taking away the complexity and allowing every analyst to be a super analyst. It's almost like you're giving them superpowers to do what they would normally take up to a few days to now do in seconds. It's a true force multiplier. So generative AI can support and augment cybersecurity. But at the same time, cybersecurity is inherently complex if we understand it as being shaped by historical, cultural, and political legacies. So to free up thinking about cybersecurity, we can question starting assumptions about the idea of security itself. Lenny Henson and Helen Nissenbaum charted the shift from computer security to cybersecurity and examined the political and normative ramifications of formulating cyber issues as security problems. Cybersecurity emerged from the post-Cold War agenda in response to technological innovations and changing geopolitical conditions. In the 1990s, computer scientists first used cybersecurity to categorize a series of insecurities related to network computers. Security was treated primarily as a technical problem. As computer scientists and professionals grappled with how to protect computer systems and their users from attacks, the cybersecurity discourses circulated by the media, private corporations, and American politicians, likened threats to network computers as electronic Pearl Harbors and weapons of mass disruption to conjure significant threats to the Western world. Following September 11, 2001, discourses of cybersecurity changed dramatically. The cybersecurity rhetoric from US government officials positioned dangers as imminent, dire, and urgent, situating cyberspace as an embattled frontier and making ample use of public anxiety after 9/11. So I want to continue considering how different groups stabilize ideas of cybersecurity, including the accepted norms about what is and is not a vulnerability. In January 2022, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity published a really helpful guidance document entitled Security Considerations When Using Social Media in Your Organization. And it recommends security measures that any organization can implement to safeguard users, processes, and technologies involved in creating and publishing posts online. And the typical social media threats outlined reflect normative definitions of risks and threats, such as phishing attacks, malware attacks, human error, disinformation campaigns, brand impersonation, and identity theft or account takeover attacks. So when I was reading the document, I had a what if thought. What if the inherent insecurities of social media platforms were included in a securities considerations document? Platforms are ripe with vulnerabilities that exploit users. The social media security considerations document recognizes that, quote, users can consent to these companies to collect, use, or share their information. The consideration of this potential security risk is to pay close attention to the terms of use agreements and the privacy notice statements, Familiarize yourself with platform-specific tools and customizable privacy features. Continuously review these services for updates and take advantage of new tools that you can use to reduce your risk of exposure. So the security considerations and this document and many others like it try to devise approaches for users to protect themselves. And there's a recognition of and desire to mitigate harm, ultimately in the effort to protect end users. Yet these resources individualize the problems. Safety and risk are framed primarily through individual choices, transferring responsibility to the end user. Since May 2021, United Nations member states have been negotiating a comprehensive international treaty to counter cybercrime, first proposed by Russia. If adopted by the UN General Assembly, it would be the first binding UN instrument on cybersecurity to tackle cybercrime and improve cooperation and coordination between member states. The treaty could become an important global legal framework for international cooperation on preventing and investigating cybercrime, prosecuting cybercriminals, and reducing the risk of applying cybercrime laws to inflict arbitrary restrictions on rights and freedoms. Civil society, human and digital rights groups have been and continue to raise concerns about how little scrutiny of this process has been from a human rights perspective instead of a geopolitical one. There is heightened concern that without sufficient human rights safeguards, the treaty could criminalize expression and dissent, reshape law enforcement access to data, create extensive surveillance powers, and facilitate cross-border repression. Deborah Brown of Human Rights Watch has said this latest draft is, quote, primed to facilitate abuses on a global scale through extensive cross-border powers to investigate virtually any imaginable crime, like peaceful dissent or expression of sexual orientation, while undermining the treaty's purpose of addressing genuine cybercrime. So as Helen Nissenbaum has explained, the extraordinary measures adopted under the guise of security typically bend the rules of standard governance and break from routine democratic procedures. Nissenbaum encourages us to remain attentive to how broader conceptions of security inform computer security domains, because each warrant specific defensive activities. Which actors make epistemic claims about risk, insecurities, and threats? How are insecurities, risks, and harms valued differently? What policy choices shape how these systems are designed and implemented? How is the technical apparatus of cybersecurity informed by broader political and cultural debates, concerns, norms, and tensions? Okay, so we're going to move on to part 2. AI is a double-edged sword. Machine learning as a form of AI has been used in security analytics for over a decade. However, the launch of ChatGPT in November 2022 reshaped the contours of AI's publicities in the cybersecurity sector. And by publicities, I mean how AI is promoted and publicized in cybersecurity. And my research, and I briefly touch on this today, has been attending to narratives of inevitability that bolster AI as a predestined or natural technological progression. And coinciding and intertwined with inevitability narratives is hype, often packaged as promises of a utopian AI future. And it's through these more obvious narratives I trace gaps and silences, omissions and tensions. So what is not being said about AI is just as significant as what is said. Industry reports, technology, journalism, and promotional materials generated by technology firms situate AI as a double-edged sword. Threat actors, widely recognized as having evolving techniques, tactics, and procedures, are adopting AI and automation to find system weaknesses. Platforms like ChatGPT can be used to identify and exploit vulnerabilities through the ability to automate code completion, code summarization, and bug detection. And deepfake video and AI-powered text-to-speech tools can be used for identification spoofing and impersonation. Just trying to get to my next slide. Here we go. At the same time, there is consensus among professionals that implementing generative AI will enhance existing security tools and processes. Generative AI is both a liability and an asset to cybersecurity. And these divergent narratives are equalized by the benevolent push to use AI for the greater good, an effort that must also be understood in conjunction with the motivations of technology firms to claim their position as a leader within the AI arms race. So I'm going to look at three cases to trace the imaginaries generated about the future to support advances in AI. And so I'll kind of look at the imaginaries first, and then I'll provide a more cohesive analysis. So these include IBM's Watson for Cybersecurity that was recently rebranded to Watson X, all lowercase, CrowdStrike's generative AI security analyst, Charlotte AI, and Google's security large language model, SecPom. And questions organizing this section include, how do the future imaginaries put forth by IBM, CrowdStrike, and Google about AI as an essential ally or a game changer in the ongoing battle against cyber threats contain and corral collective notions of insecurity? How do these technology firms stabilize AI inevitability narratives through epistemic claims and future predictions? What does an analysis of the relationship between innovation and containment in the discourses of AI inevitability in cyberspace reveal about variants of non-technical insecurities? And how do these imaginaries bolster the aspirations of these firms to dominate in the AI arms race? Okay, so we'll look at IBM first. So in 2017, IBM launched its Cognitive Security Center, and cognitive security is the term IBM uses for applying AI technologies modeled on human thought processes to detect and assess security threats. And at the core of IBM's Security Operations Center is Watson, a data analytics processor that can perform analytics on vast data repositories to answer human-posed questions, often in the fraction of a second. Companies and organizations across various industries have run IBM Watson for predictive analytics and problem solving. And even, 5 or 6 years ago, it was implemented by end users like physicians to analyze medical data and assist in making diagnosis and treatment, especially in oncology and radiology. And of course, maybe most memorably, IBM Watson gained fame in 2011 for beating Jeopardy's highest winning player, Ken Jennings. When IBM launched its Cognitive Security Center, the company boasted that Watson could spot network anomalies and interpret research reports because it had read over 1 million security documents. Company documents explained Watson for Cybersecurity as an automated security system that identifies security issues without relying extensively on human resources. And it does what no human analyst can, which is process and analyze huge volumes of structured and unstructured data in real time and identify connections among data points that would otherwise be impossible for humans to detect. Company documents provide a compelling AI imaginary by positioning it as a trustworthy resource and advocating for how AI can support, augment, and in some instances, work more steadily and efficiently than humans. The company document Beyond the Hype identifies numerous workforce issues. It outlines how AI can reduce these problems, boldly declaring that it can, quote, solve what might be your biggest challenge, people. The document scopes the problem as twofold: scarcity and job fatigue. First, there is a dearth of skilled workers in the cybersecurity domain. For every 100 cybersecurity roles needed, there are 48 qualified candidates. This is coming from the company documents. Even when experts are hired, these frontline analysts, as they're called, are often new to the industry, and it takes time for them to develop the competencies and confidence in their investigation skills. Second, the document makes note of widespread job fatigue characterized by being overwhelmed by repetitive work. An AI solution can rejuvenate the security analyst by automating repeatable tasks and mitigating fatigue. So AI is proposed as a vital part of your arsenal of security weapons. It doesn't get fatigued. It can solve your people problem because it doesn't go on vacation. It never leaves you for another job. At the same time, the document reveals the human expert as being in control to set the course and be at the helm. You decide how much work you want AI to do, from time-intensive tasks to making the routine decisions. So AI is not a threat to humans, but rather an ally humans can control to alleviate some of the more onerous aspects of the workload, while fundamentally changing how cybersecurity is carried out at scale. Okay, so I'm going to kind of pause with IBM, and I'll come back to it in the analysis and move on to CrowdStrike. So CrowdStrike is a US cybersecurity technology company that provides antivirus endpoint security solutions, threat intelligence, and other cyber attack response services. The company has investigated several prominent cyber attacks, including the 2016 Democratic National Committee email leak and the 2014 Sony Picture hack. The US Department of State, JP Morgan and Chase, and American Express are some of CrowdStrike's high-profile clients. In May 2013, so very recently, CrowdStrike introduced its new generative AI cybersecurity analyst, Charlotte AI, which the company describes as an intelligent security analyst, helping clients to better understand the threats and risks facing their organization. So what you see on the slide is Charlotte AI, anthropomorphized as a white female presenting security analyst. So there's a lot to unpack here regarding gender and race, and I'll do that work in the analysis section. So for now, I just want to take us through the Imaginaries put forth by CrowdStrike, which will set us up for what's to come. So a press release announcing the AI proclaimed CrowdStrike enters the generative AI cybersecurity race. Charlotte AI is a chatbot trained on data from trillions of security events captured across users, devices, identities, and cloud workloads to identify potential attacks and malicious activity indicators. It enables customers to interact with the company's Falcon platform. And this platform monitors malicious activities, detects unauthorized access in real time, applies mitigation techniques, and blocks data tampering across multiple devices. So Charlotte AI enables its end users or customers to ask questions, natural language questions, and receive answers from the Falcon platform. In its press release for Charlotte AI, the company described the AI analyst as addressing 3 common use cases. So first, generative AI as a democratizing force. Every user becomes a power user. Everyone in an organization can ask direct questions and obtain real-time actionable insights. The second is elevating security analyst productivity with AI-powered threat hunting. So the promise is that less experienced IT and security professionals can make better decisions faster, closing the skills gap and reducing response time to critical incidents. The third is make advanced security actions easier and automate mundane tasks. So Charlotte AI can automate repetitive and tedious tasks, enabling experts to focus on performing more advanced security actions that necessitate human intervention. So there are obvious overlaps with IBM regarding AI as a fundamental game changer for cybersecurity, for how it can create, using the same language, power users, support less experienced IT and security professionals, and bear the brunt of mundane tasks. As for the framing of generative AI and cybersecurity as a democratizing force for whom is a simple but necessary question to pose, and I'll come back to it. Okay, so we're going to move on to Google. So in April, let me just close that. In April 2023, Google announced its Cloud Security AI Workbench, a cybersecurity suite powered by a specialized security AI language model called SecPalm. SecPalm is a generative AI model focusing exclusively on security use cases, and it's an offshoot of Google's Pathways language model, or PaLM. It is trained on a security intelligence database of billions of entries consisting of behavioral threat actor profiles, research on software vulnerabilities, malware, threat indicators, and Mandiant security flaws. So Mandiant, one of the leading American cybersecurity firms, was purchased by Google in 2022 for something like $5.4 billion, making it the company's second biggest acquisition, but it maintains its brand as a subsidiary of Google Cloud. Like IBM and CrowdStrike, Google positions AI for cybersecurity as a game changer for the industry, notably for its potential to address the chronic talent shortage and job fatigue. At the time of the launch of the Cloud AI Workbench, GM and VP Sunil Pati published a post on the company's blog titled Supercharging Security with Generative AI. In it, Pati explains that, quote, that to truly democratize security, recognition that AI will soon usher in a new era for security expertise is paramount. So within this proximate future, and sorry, I'm quoting, but you can see a chunk of the quote on the slide. So within this proximate future, both novices and experts are coupled with AI expertise, being alleviated from repetition and burnout, and accomplishing tasks that seem impossible to us today. So here we see sort of a discursive leveraging of AI's proximate possibilities, even more so than IBM and CrowdStrike. In the quote on the slide, we can observe future orientations such as soon usher, new era, and imagine a world, which is also evident elsewhere in the post in a subsection called Building a Safer Future, where Pati notes how we have only just begun to realize the power of applying generative AI to security. So I want to return to this notion that I'm grappling with and putting forward, automating insecurities. In Ruha Benjamin's work provides one possible analytic approach, which is to examine the default settings of generative AI in cybersecurity. In her Introduction to Captivating Technology, Benjamin explains how examining the default settings, quote, encompasses legal, economic, and now computer codes, and moves past an individual's intention to discriminate by focusing analysis on how technoscience reflects and reproduces social hierarchies, whether wittingly or not. So I've tried to show how IBM, CrowdStrike, and Google generate imaginaries about the application of generative AI in cybersecurity. Overwhelmingly, these imaginaries share a vision of AI as having a dramatically positive influence on cybersecurity work. And you'll have picked up on common and sometimes identical phrasing. And because I was examining IBM Watson, out of curiosity, I thought to look at vintage IBM ads or historical IBM ads to compare the discourses used to sell, literally and figuratively, computers. And this led me to computer advertisements beyond IBM from the 1950s to the 1980s. And so for the sake of time, I'll show a few spanning the early 50s to late 60s. And this is an area I need to delve further into, but my preliminary research found consistency in how computers are situated and how generative AI in cybersecurity is currently framed. So this first ad for IBM's electronic calculator boasts how it can speedily complete thousands of intricate computations so quickly on many complex problems, reminiscent of how AI can also take away the complexity or alleviate the complexity. While it doesn't use super analyst or superpower, it does say how the machine is like having 150 extra engineers. And, borrowing from some of the language we just heard, it's a force multiplier. Further similarities include the machine mitigating a talent shortage and reducing the toil of repetitive tasks, allowing experts to focus their time elsewhere. This second ad brings us back to the notion of complexity reduction. So the UNIVAC Scientific does this by solving complex problems. Further, real time is frequently used here as it is to describe what generative AI can provide, which is real-time actionable insights. And this third one, and apologies for the version that you see here, I'm tracking down a better copy of it, replicates how generative AI can also do the repetitive and tedious work, enabling a refocusing of one's time elsewhere. So in this IBM ad, the added time can be applied to doing one's actual job. And remember too how the application of generative AI in cybersecurity can enable the analyst to focus on attending to threat responses, having been freed from manual threat investigation, which is tedious and slows down response times. There we go. So I'm thinking through how the AI imaginaries that prescribe a future also repeat the past. AI is bringing about seismic shifts, opportunities, and challenges, and that's not in dispute. But how we're lured into the hype, utopian and dystopian, also fundamentally sways perceptions of the technology. When observing how the vintage ads as historical antecedents, we can ask, if machines in the 50s and 60s and AI in 2024 are engendered through similar discourses, how might we understand the imaginaries of generative AI in cybersecurity differently? What do these discursive facsimils reveal? What is heightened and omitted from these hegemonic discourses? What are repetitions in the default settings? So let's return to Charlotte AI, paying attention to how the chatbot is anthropomorphized as a white female presenting security analyst. And so here I'm sharing two images. One is of Charlotte AI in a promotional campaign, and the other is the example of the interface from company documents. So according to a 2022 World Economic Forum report, women comprise only 26% of data and AI positions in the workforce. So at least superficially, Charlotte AI challenges gendered stereotypes of a security analyst. But if we look at CrowdStrike's promotional materials, Charlotte AI's role is automating repetitive and tedious tasks like data collection, extraction, and basic threat search and detection, while making it easier to perform more advanced security action, making it easier for the analyst or expert to do those advanced security actions. In effect, Charlotte AI performs the grunt work so experts can focus on solving more complex problems, which is absolutely fine as a generative AI chatbot, right? It's doing precisely what it's supposed to do, but this is problematized by Charlotte AI's anthropomorphism. The feminization of the AI reinforces stereotypes and structural hierarchies based on pre-assigned gender roles. Charlotte AI is subservient, working in support of security experts, doing mundane tasks premised on its extensive and impressive knowledge. How the feminization of AI reinforces stereotypes and structural hierarchies must also be situated within the history of computing post-World War II. Women, and primarily white women, pioneered computing programming, though programming was originally, they pioneered computer programming, and it was originally associated with and predominantly done by women. But the work was feminized and viewed as de-skilled and unimportant, unlike the engineering side of things, which was male-dominated. Programming was associated with secretarial work, which was historically a highly feminized and gendered profession. And this slide shows a 1961 ad circulated in Canada for the international temp agency Manpower, which actually still exists. The agency lists IBM operators as an area of specialization, and though not given the title, operators were usually programmers as well. As computers became vital to industry and government, those who knew how to use them would be at an advantage, and women were edged out. Janet Abate's Recoding Gender, Nathan Envenger's The Computer Boys Take Over, and Mar Hicks' Program Inequality examine and revive the role of women in computer history. And as an aside, what I also discovered is that language used in temp agency advertisements from the late 60s to 70s, also kind of a rabbit hole I went down, to describe the feminized and highly gendered workforce mirrors some of the ways the benefits of the application of generative AI in cybersecurity are described. So according to these advertisements from 1970, the temp, quote, never takes a vacation or holiday, never asks for a raise, and never fails to please, end quote. The temp has passed rigid quality control standards of testing. Operationally, she's a beauty. Watch the work disappear, and the newest model in the world's most distinguished line. And one of the temps is presumably about to be unboxed. But because this is a very recent observation, I have much more to consider and research about the potential connection between the imaginaries about generative AI enhancing cybersecurity work with the selling of human business machines and temp work, and how temp industry leaders convinced different groups that temp workers were essential for the economy, a similar phenomenon to how imaginaries about AI as essential are stabilized and performed by the tech industry. But I thought I'd share anyway. So adding to these observations, we must examine Charlotte AI's depiction of whiteness. Returning to to Ruha Benjamin, an analysis of how the tendency to give Charlotte AI human qualities will move past the intention to discriminate by focusing on how social hierarchies are produced, again, whether wittingly or not. So with Charlotte AI, like so many other renderings of AI, the default setting is whiteness. But instead of focusing on Charlotte AI specifically, I want to take a cue from Stephen Cave and Kanta Dihal from Cambridge Leverhulme Center for the Future of Artificial Intelligence, who ask us to consider how the portrayals and stereotypes of AI as white risk creating a racially homogeneous workforce, building machines and systems that reflect this homogeneity. As Ruha Benjamin and scholars like Jesse Daniels, Sophia Noble, Meredith Broussard, Andre Brock, Lisa Nakamura, and Wendy Chun, among others, have shown, if whiteness is not acknowledged or examined, it is then treated as the default or neutral setting or perspective. So as we observe through the Imaginaries put forward by IBM, CrowdStrike, and Google, the cybersecurity workforce has a talent gap, and this dearth is inextricably tied to a lack of diversity in the field. A 2018 US-based study conducted by ISC2, which is a leading member association for cybersecurity professionals, found the representation of Black, Latino, and Native American cybersecurity workforce professionals is significantly lower than general labor force representation and general US population representation. Further, women who identify as Black, Hispanic, Asian, or of Native American descent report the highest numbers of discrimination. So in response to this problem, there are growing efforts to train, attract, recruit, and retain diverse talent. And recognition of a homogeneous workforce and focused training efforts are essential to transforming the cybersecurity domain to recode its default settings. To support cybersecurity to cultivate and embed anti-oppressive practices, it's fundamental, as Camille Stewart writes, to build teams composed of diverse viewpoints and conscious of race issues can help elevate those nuances, identify new tactics, techniques, and procedures, and adapt detection to relevant environments. But at the same time, anti-oppressive cybersecurity frameworks need to coexist alongside mainstream ones. So cybersecurity frameworks are premised on a universal end user who experiences insecurities uniformly, but this is not the case. Experiences of and knowledge about cyber insecurities are shaped by oppressions and privileges located in relation to various and intersecting identities, including but not limited to race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, disability, and geography. End users occupy multiple positionalities that are fluid, contextually situated, and continuously amended and reproduced. Risks, harm, and insecurities are experienced differently based on end user identities, but these experiences are omitted from normative cybersecurity frameworks. And compounding these issues, these populations experiencing the brunt of inequality, bias, and systemic, racism also become targets of invasive and unwarranted surveillance, sometimes under the guise, or not sometimes, quite often under the guise of security. And this is a major concern about the UN Cybercrime Treaty because its scope has broadened beyond cybercrimes to encompass a long list of non-cybercrimes. So a facet of my research, and I don't get into this today because I don't yet have sufficient data to really be able to present on it, but a component to my work considers the algorithms and data used to predict and detect cybersecurity threats and misbehaviors, and how this can reproduce racial and gender discrimination. So I'm interested in how self-learning or thinking security systems that use data mining, pattern recognition, and natural language processing are trained on data that is inherently biased to the social reality it represents, which is, an epistemic version of security that's connected to a particular set of threats, risks, and vulnerabilities. And of course, all of these correspond and are embedded in mainstream cybersecurity frameworks. So to address these issues, well, at least in part, and to start addressing these issues, we need research agendas, cybersecurity frameworks, and approaches that are in harmony with and completely incompatible with mainstream frameworks. We also need competing AI imaginaries. And luckily, this work is underway with initiatives like Indigenous AI and Black AI. In a much longer version of this talk, I would delve further into this, but wanted to bring these into the space today for everyone. Okay, so I'm going to move on to part 3. I don't want to be suspicious of everything. So I want to think with this 2018 poster from Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. So it's meant to be playful and funny, reminding readers to be prudent in their information, data security, and privacy practices. But nevertheless, cybersecurity and its attending risks, threats, and vulnerabilities are defined within mainstream frameworks and place the burden on the end user. What constitutes unsafe activities? And some common examples, such as ransomware attacks, hacked accounts, and email fraud, don't reflect how people experience insecurities. And this is, what I was just talking about recently, about how risks, threats, vulnerabilities, safety, and security are experienced differently and impacted by relational positions, including, but not limited to class, race, religion, gender, disability, and geography. So if end users are characterized uniformly, the specificities impacting access to safety and security and the risks and threats not measured by mainstream frameworks are omitted. What if end users, rather than being perceived as passive recipients of products developed by expert communities, are reconceptualized as experts with lived experiences and situated knowledge of cyber insecurities? James Pierce, Sarah Fox, Nick Merrill, and Richmond Wong approach the topic of cybersecurity through differential vulnerabilities. As the authors explain, a differential vulnerabilities perspective understands security and safety as socially contingent and how different populations face different types and degrees of security risks. This notion challenges universalizing tendencies that frame cybersecurity around an abstract or generic user. The term can activate a shift in thinking about security as an objective or universal measure to a marker of relational positions that are maintained, contingent, and may change over time. So the authors advance the concept by studying ready-made cybersecurity self-defense toolkits. For example, Tactical Tech developed Security in a Box, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation devised a surveillance self-defense tool guide. And both are really important resources that alleviate how mainstream frameworks place the burden of security on the end users. At the same time, toolkits can unwittingly apply a universal measure of what constitutes vulnerabilities. And this is really what the authors are interested in. So to shift from an all-encompassing understanding of vulnerability as an inherent quality or characteristic, the authors center feminist, queer, and critical race perspective. Following Sarah Ahmed, vulnerability involves a particular kind of bodily relation to the world and is experienced differently by different bodies. Differential vulnerabilities can enable us to pay close attention to processes of creating and maintaining relational positions of being vulnerable, while challenging the notion of vulnerable population as a pre-existing category. Who is vulnerable to what? How are vulnerable positionalities made and unmade by current cybersecurity frameworks? What other security practices and processes influence such relations? So I've embraced the concept as a pragmatic design concern and a critical concept for broader security discourses. How can we co-create cybersecurity frameworks underpinned by a differential vulnerabilities perspective? And research that I'm currently getting off the ground aims to answer this question by collaborating with local grassroots organizations to build frameworks from the ground up. So as I've been arguing throughout, mainstream cybersecurity frameworks register risks, threats, and vulnerabilities as universal measures. But what might happen if we register these same concerns, not universally, but locally, and is compatible with or responsive to the values of those intending to use a framework? So in this emerging research area, I want to start with local communities and organizations, centering cybersecurity as contextual and situated in specific places and spaces, emerging from embodied experiences, not as something that exists like out there or is a shifting horizon, although cybersecurity is a shifting horizon. Adjusting the focus from a preoccupation with the act or action of cybersecurity and centering embodied experiences could creatively complicate the default settings of automated cybersecurity. Okay, so we can acknowledge the real need for cybersecurity while simultaneously scrutinizing the patterns of power and policy choices that shape how cybersecurity systems are designed and implemented. Examining how cybersecurity takes shape through socio-technical imaginaries can enable us to evaluate the power differentials at play. We appraise some of the limitations to how cybersecurity frameworks can omit vulnerability. Constituting something as a cybersecurity problem simultaneously defines something else as not. And this process has significant consequences because it establishes the problem with a status and priority that non-cybersecurity problems do not have. Notably, how particular security renderings are superimposed on cybersecurity will justify specific defensive activities. And we considered the limitations of the default settings of AI imaginaries in cybersecurity. These imaginaries present a vision in which AI-driven systems can address, mitigate, and resolve cybersecurity incidents, while also doing so efficiently, productively, and with less strain on already overworked human experts. And this is not false, but these imaginaries also perpetuate inevitability narratives that the only way to resolve cybersecurity issues is with AI. Without AI, we're losing the battle. And this totalizing view renders AI the necessary tool and sidelines essential questions about what's missing in the first place. Examining how biases and assumptions are baked into AI imaginaries can enable the formulation of questions to support the development of frameworks, practices, and processes that are compatible and with that these can be compatible with and responsive to a range of insecurities that are not just technical. But these problems can't just be dumped on the cybersecurity domain to fix. These frameworks must be developed cooperatively, sometimes severed from mainstream initiatives, and bring together different groups with divergent skills, perspectives, lived experiences, and positionalities. And all of this is to say that we need to attend to imbalances in power and privilege that shape the production and dissemination of discursive and technical knowledge about what constitutes a risk, threat, and vulnerability, influence the design of systems and policies, and morph security concerns and practices in ways that perpetuate, stabilize, and automate insecurities. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. This was fascinating. Really appreciate it. There's so much to unpack in the talk. It will take me at least another watch through your talk to get some of these, and I hope you will share your slides with us to go through it later. We have a few minutes for any pressing questions that anyone might have. So please raise your virtual hand or your physical hand if you have your camera on.
Great. I'll just stop the recording before we get into it.
Please. Yes, please.